Welcome to the tutorial for the Iford blouse. This blouse has a frilled sleeve and a frill down the seam that goes over the bust. So we're going to start simply by using the panel seam frill pieces. You should have 2 pairs of these, and it's this straight line here that we're going to be stitching together, which is not on the straight grain, so do be careful you don't stretch it. So you can see I've got a pair here. This is right sides together. Match up that straight line, and we're just going to stitch the centimetre seam allowance from top to bottom. There we go. Centimetre seam allowance. I'm going to overlock that to finish it off. You could zigzag, or your preferred method of finishing. Could always French seam these if you're feeling ambitious. So press that seam to one side. Job done. So now we're going to hem these frills. There's several ways you can do this, and I've got my samples here in my hand that I used for the Fittleworth blouse tutorial, just to show you different methods of finishing. You can, if you've got a fancy overlocker, just do a really tight together rolled hem on your overlocker, which is lovely. This one's overlocked and turned up, so it's just stitched, overlocked and stitched. Nice simple one. This one is probably another nice easy one, which is where you just turn a little bit over, press it, stitch it, and then you turn it and press it and stitch it again. So you get quite a nice little fine hem there. And that's how it looks on the right side. And the wrong side, you see you've got 2 stitch rows there, although I've put them on top of each other. And this one is the beautiful one, which is using a rolled hem foot, which you should be able to get for your machine if you don't already have it. However, beautiful on the straight grain, but incredibly tricky around curves. So for ease and quickness, I'm doing this finish today. I'm doing the overlock and turn. And I'm going to do this outside edge. There we go, just overlocked around the edge there. And then I'm simply going to turn it up a little bit more than the overlocking amount so it doesn't show, and then just stitch it down. Incidentally, I think the rolled hem on the overlocker is a beautiful finish if you have an overlocker that does it. Unfortunately, the machine that I've got that does it is a bit broken and the tension's all over the place, so I need to get it fixed. So this for me is the easier option. There we go, nicely stitched, just needs a press. There you go. That was quick, wasn't it? Next, we're going to do the shoulder seams, and we're going to do these in 2 lots. So I've got my centre front and my centre back here. I'm going to join the shoulders like so. So I'm going to unpin my pattern. Make sure you've marked your notches on everything before you unpin it, obviously. And I'm going to open up my centre front because it was onto the fold. And there we go. And then I'm going to lay out my backs so that they are correct. There we go. So I've got my centre backs together, and I'm just going to lay these shoulders right sides together, flip them over so I know the right one is on the right one, and I'm going to stitch the centimetre on both sides. There we go, nice neat little shoulder seams. Finish those off, neaten them. I'm using my overlocker as usual. There we go, and now let's lay it out. I'm going to press my seams towards the back, so the seam is going one way on both, or the same way on both the shoulders. There we go. That's part 1 of the shoulder seams. Now this is the second part. We've got the side front and the side back, and that's how my shoulders go there. So you can see the arm size were joined together. Do make sure you've not marked your notches again before you take your pattern pieces off. So they're important on this dress, blouse even. So, right sides together again. And a quick pin. Right sides together again. And you'll know these are together the correct way because you'll have right sides together and the arm size will both be on top of each other. So there's your arm side for the back and the other one is your front. Centimetre seam allowance again. I'm going to give that a little overlock and a press. There we go. And this time I have pressed the seam allowance towards the front. So it's going the opposite way to the other one. So, you know, that's the front panel because it's got the bust allowance there. It's a lot of a much shallower curve on the back. Okay, so now we're going to pop this frill into the seam. I'm going to stitch it to my centre fronts and centre backs because they are less curved than the other side. I've stay stitched around my neckline because this is a very light viscose that I'm using, which is really lovely and floaty, but it will stretch. So this is the edge we're going to attach the frill to. As you can see, it's much straighter than the side front and the side back. Now, here we go, raw edge. That seam, remember, is our shoulder seam, so I'm going to pin the seam to the seam. The front and the back frill are both the same, so you don't have a right side or a back and a front or anything. There we go. I'm just going to lay my frill on top of my back panel I'm doing now, and I'm just pinning it. And then I'm going to do my front. And I'm not pulling it, I'm literally just laying it on and opening it out as much as I can. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some little snips just to the frill, not to the bodice. And I'm just doing this at the tightest parts of the curve. And these little cuts are about 5mm, so half your centimetre seam allowance in depth. And all this does is help to open out the curve so that when you're stitching it on, it will lay a little flatter and you shouldn't get any of those tucks in it when you come to stitch it down. So I'm going to start stitching from my shoulder down, and I'm going to do this both sides. So I'm starting at the shoulder and working down the front, then I'm starting at the shoulder and working down the back. And as you can see, I'm just gently opening up those cut areas. So I'm just laying those raw edges together, the edge of the frill to the edge of the blouse. And I'm not pulling it, I'm literally just allowing those snips to open up to make that frill as straight as possible as I stitch it down. There we go, so I've stitched down both ways from the shoulder. It looks a bit like an octopus at the moment. There we go, there's my raw edge. I'm going to overlock that once I've stitched the other panel on, so for the moment it's staying like this. Let me try and make sense of it for you so you can see where we're at. There you go, that's my centre front seam and that's my frill on the right. Okay, so next we're going to join our sides to our fronts and backs. So you should have, this is my centre front at the top and my glorious frills on the side. So you should have both frills on, your neckline stay stitched and your centre back still open. I'm just going to fold these frills in and I'm going to find my corresponding side front, side back. That being my front because it's the curvier one and the straighter one being the back, so I need to flip this round and do it the other way. That's it, and then I need to flip this around. So again, shoulder seams need to go together. Your centre front needs to match your side front. Remember, your side front has the curvier area for your bust. So starting at the shoulder, match those seam lines, and you should have notches that match. Yeah, there's one there. So there should be a corresponding one down here on the bodice. Oh, and being too old to sew black and it's all patterned, I can't see it. So I'm going to start by pinning from the hem up, because then I know my notches should be very near each other, even if they're not exactly on top of each other just yet. So start pinning, and then as I get to the notches, I'll be able to see them easier. Here we go. Just make sure that frill is tucked in. It's not poking out, so you're not going to stitch over it. There we go, there's a notch. Yeah, that's it. I've got it now. And there's another one there. Let's just make sure those are in line. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so pin the other side as well. So you've got your side fronts and your side backs attached to your centre fronts and your centre backs. And I'm going to stitch again from my shoulder down. There we go. So you've got this lovely long seam line now going right over your shoulder, containing your frill. And we're going to overlock or finish it in a zigzag. And there we go. And you just need to do the same for the other side. Let's have a look. There we go. There you can see there's the underarm and there's the frill. So we're going to pop the side seams together now that we've got our bodice pretty much together. You can see the beautiful frills there. Centre back's still open, remember. So again, keep those frills out the way. You don't want to trap them into your seams. Starting under the arm towards the hem, pin and stitch. Again, centimetre seam allowance. Then we're going to overlock it and press it to one side. That's it sewn. A quick overlock, and then I'm going to press mine towards the back. Lovely. So now you've got your armhole frills. Now this is what I would call a flutter sleeve, but I didn't want to call it a sleeve because that puts people off, and it's super simple. Make sure you've got all your notches marked. You need one pair of these because yeah, this is your back and this is your front. Let's unpin. There we go. So, sort of semicircles, aren't they really? Right sides together. You've got a tiny little underarm seam that we're going to do first. That's this little bit here. So centimetre seam allowance, give it a stitch. There we go. I'm overlocking mine and then just press it to one side. There we go, it's starting to look like a little flutter sleeve already. So open it out, and it's this outer edge again. We're going to repeat what we did for the frill. So whichever process you used for your frill, you can do the same for your armhole frill. There we go. So I'm just folding mine over and stitching all around. So there you go. Just needs a little press. Looks pretty neat. That's it. Right, let's put these frills into the armholes. So here's my blouse, here's my frill. Let me see, let's find my notches for the back armhole. There we go, double notch for the back of the armhole. So I know that is the back and that needs to go on this side. So I'm going to find my underarm seam and my underarm sleeve seam and pin those together so that I know I'm in the right place. Then I can't go wrong. So matching those seams, then turn it through and work through the inside of your armhole. Hang on, I've lost my sleeve. There it is. There we go. So right sides together as usual. And we're just going to work our way around the inside of this sleeve. So I'll just pop one pin in here first, and then I'm going to find the notch that matches the shoulder seam. There we go, shoulder seam notch. And there's my shoulder seam. And as I say, putting these in, it isn't like putting in a set-in sleeve. There's no sleeve head or anything tricky. There's no ease. It all literally just fits together. So it's super duper simple and it just looks so pretty. There we go. Pop some pins in the rest of the armhole. That's it. And I'm going to start at the underarm seam. Always sew your sleeves in from the inside of the armhole. And I'm just stitching around centimetre seam allowance, keeping those raw edges together and making sure those notches match. Okay, that's sewn in. Make sure there's no catches or anything. I'm going to overlook it. There we go. Nice easy sleeve in. So there you have it. You've got your big frill and then you've got your little sleeve frill, which just looks so pretty. It hangs really lovely in this viscose. Okay, so the next job is to pop the facing on. This is what you're going to put your buttonholes into if you're going to do buttonholes and buttons. So, right side of the back. This is a strip, it's straight grain. I've popped a little bit of very, very, very light interfacing in. I don't like to put anything too heavy in things like blouses because I think it ruins the drape. So straight grain to straight grain, so it's just from the top all the way down, centimetre seam allowance. There we go. Next you want to press the seam allowance onto the facing. And I've also pressed back my centimetre seam allowance on the other side of the facing, the other edge. Now we're going to fold it over. You can pop some pins in, give it another press if you need to get that edge nice and crisp, and then stitch on the edge of the facing, that crease, that fold. There we go. That's it. One facing done. Give it a final press for good measure. Perfect. Okay, so let's get this facing prepped. Here we go. You should have 2 pieces of back neck facing, a pair, and 1 piece for the front facing. I've used, again, a super light interfacing on mine, just to give it a tiny bit of stability without making it too hard. So the angled pieces should go on the shoulder. Centimetre seam allowance. Let's press that open. And I'm just going to overlook around the outside of this now to neaten it. You could bind it or you could turn it under or whatever your preference is. There we go. So I'll give it one more press probably before I put it on. Right, here's my blouse, here's my facing. So we need to match these shoulder seams up. Pop a pin in. And this is where we benefit from having stay stitched our neckline, because it won't be all stretched out of all recognition. We'll be able to hopefully just quite nicely pin them together, and they should be pretty much spot on still. There we go, nice. Now you should have your centimetre seam allowance extra on the side that we've put the buttonhole facing. You should have a little bit extra there for your seam allowance. So leave that overlapping, but this side should be the same, so they should match. Centimetre seam allowance, stitch all round your curve of your neckline. It's worth taking a little bit of time with this because it really is a focal point. Oh, there's a little bit of thread, that's annoying. Let's stitch across that. We'll cut that away in a minute. There we go. Stitching around nice and carefully all the way around your neckline. There we are. Now we're going to snip into the curves so that we can edge stitch or understitch. Trim down your facing seam allowance by half. Do yours all the way around. I will in a minute, but I'm just going to show you what's next so you don't have to watch me cut. So I'm pulling the seam allowance underneath the facing, and I'm going to stitch just to the right there, just on top of the facing on the edge. So the seam allowance goes that way. Give it a press if it helps, and then stitch right on the edge to hold that seam allowance towards the facing, which gives it a really lovely finish to the neckline. It makes such a difference. It's well worth doing. Okay, understitching done, you can see it there. And I'm going to lay that nice and flat and give it a press. There we go, so that's all pressed. Let's have a look, make sure that looks nice. Lovely. So my next job is to just stay stitch this down, or stitch in the ditch. So I match these seams at the shoulder here, and I'm just going to stitch in that seam on both shoulders through all the layers, just to hold the facing down so it doesn't flap up when you're putting it on. There we go. You can stitch it all the way around if you want to, but I like to just have a plain neckline sometimes. So this just keeps it anchored. Lovely. So now we're going to do the button stand. You'll know this is the button stand because this is slightly wider than the piece for the buttonhole facing. I've folded it in half, wrong sides together, pressed it. Now I'm folding it back to right sides together just to bag this little end out here. So centimetre seam allowance, and I've just clipped that corner off. I'm going to trim that seam allowance down a little bit and then just turn it through and tease that little corner out. That's it. So that is your button stand prep. Now we're going to attach it. So this side was for the buttonholes, this side is for the buttons. Now that's the end that I've bagged out, so this bit needs to go to the top. So we're going to pin it down the length. This is straight grain to straight grain, so it should be a nice easy sew. Let's grab some pins. So I'm opening out my facing and I'm matching that to the seam allowance there and to the seam where the facing meets the blouse, and I'm just going to stitch down from the top again, centimetre seam allowance, top to bottom. There we go, that's all sewn. So I'm going to give that an overlock. There we go, and I'm then going to press that overlocked edge towards the blouse this time. And there we go, that's one button stand pretty much done. So with these bits here, you've got a little bit of seam allowance on your facing, which you can pin to your button stand, and you can either machine it or hand sew it. I quite like doing the little bits of hand sew, so that's why I do it, but you can see there's a stitch line there that you can stitch your hand sewing into, or use your machine. And then this side is similar. Again, you've got a centimetre seam allowance there, so just fold that little bit of seam allowance back and pop it all in, and then either hand stitch or machine, whichever is your preference. Next we're going to do the hem. Again, you can overlock it and turn it up, or you can turn and turn, or you could bind it, you could, whatever is your choice. So I'm going to just do a turn and turn today, because I think that's quite a nice finish for this. There we go, turned and turned, give it a press. We're nearly finished. There we go, it's looking really smart. So now I'm going to show you how I choose to do my buttonhole placement and button placement. Right over left. So I've folded the right back over the left back. So the edge, the centre back edge, is meeting where the stand seam is on the left. These buttons are about a centimetre, just ever so slightly bigger actually, maybe 1.1, 1.2. I wouldn't suggest you use anything bigger than that. And basically I lay them out on my blouse to what I think looks nice. So, and also how many buttons you've got, I suppose. And then I measure the space between them. And basically I've put a pin in every 6 centimetres, I think it was for this one. And I've left about 10, 11 centimetres from the bottom, because when you tuck it in your trousers or your skirt or whatever, you don't want buttons really poking through. It's a bit uncomfortable. So yeah, so I've got these about 6 centimetres apart, and I've put pins in to start with, and I'm just marking with some chalk. It's worth remembering that usually buttonholes on blouses and shirts are vertical, with the top one being horizontal. So that's what I'm going to do today. And that first button, again, it's all just done by eye, just how it looks nice on the blouse. So let's put some buttons on now. These are my buttonholes, look. You can see that one was horizontal at the top, but you can see I've used that blue chalk line and I've stitched exactly on top of it. And then for these vertical ones, I've used that blue chalk line as the top. So that's the start of my buttonhole, look. And I've done the same for each one, so they will be exactly equidistant and will look lovely when they're buttoned up. They'll be all uniform. So you want to cut open your buttonholes. I think that's the most nerve-wracking bit about doing buttons, really. And again, align that right side edge with the seam line where the button stand meets the blouse, and just pin them together all the way through all the layers so that you know that's where you want your buttons to be. And then we're going to start with this horizontal one, and I'm going to pop the pin in just a couple of mil back from the end of the buttonhole, so it will allow for me to sew the button and have the threads through the holes. There we go, look. So that will have the holes going that way, going horizontally. And then when I do mark the buttons for the vertical ones, I'm going to go into the middle. So straight through the middle of that buttonhole. So I know that's exactly where I want to be stitching my button on. And of course my holes in my button this time will go vertically. So I'll stitch it that way, not that way. That was the way for the top. That's the way for all the other buttons. So there you go. You should have something that looks like this once you've done all of that. And I think they just look so lovely. So I hope you'll have something that looks very much like this, and you should be very proud of yourself. Enjoy.